Hi there and welcome to the channel of A Disappointed Man with me, Jason Kennedy, the Disappointed Man. Now we've reached part 4 of my grand bookshelf tour and we're still stuck in the Victorian period. All of these classic works, each of which seems to feature a lost will, an orphan or a marriage. Will we ever have some new plots to entertain us? Well, in the 1860s the aesthetic movement arrived and it's part of a wider European movement known as decadence, and its foremost representative in England was Oscar Wilde. So on this shelf at the bottom I've got works by Wilde and works connected with him, so let's take a look at them. Now the first of these books is an absolute classic. It's this, Against Nature. I won't try and say his name. Unless you're Belgian, unless you're French, you'll only make a fool of yourself. But it's the dangerous book, which is repeatedly alluded to in Wilde's only novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. And for the roots of Against Nature, you can go back actually to my favourite writer from the Romantic period, Thomas de Quincey, because he really sets out the essence of decadence in his mock encomium on murder, considered as one of the fine arts. And that is very simple idea that things which are morally repugnant may be aesthetically pleasing. You can gaze at a murder with the eye of a connoisseur. And so this idea of De Quincey's migrated over the channel, and Baudelaire translated De Quincey's writing, and the French also seized on his notion of the flaneur. So it went on this detour and then returned in Wilde's time. Next up is this, my complete works of Oscar Wilde with the beautiful Aubrey Beardsley artwork there. It's not the complete works, these things never are, but it does contain my favourite writing by Wilde, which is his essay collection, Intentions, and specifically On the Decay of Lying, which is wonderfully lucid, beautifully written, and extremely amusing. So I do recommend that as a collection of his works there. Then we have this, the selected letters of Oscar Wilde, and I found something stimulating on almost every page of this. It's truly a must-have for anyone interested in Wilde. It touches upon so many issues which are still relevant today. That's a great read. Then we have the standard biography by Richard Ellman. It's absolutely enormous and also very enjoyable. Then I have this, The Stranger Wilde, rather weak choice of colours on the dust jacket there. Haven't read it yet. I'm always trying to find new books about Wilde. I'll be adding to this shelf a lot this year, I hope. Next up is something rather more tangential. The scripts of the operettas of Gilbert and Sullivan, because they wrote an operetta, Patience, which satirised the public persona of Wilde, and most interestingly, it was Gilbert and Sullivan who arranged Wilde's American tour of 1882, and the idea was, by introducing him to the American audience, when the play arrived in the US sometime later, it would be much more successful. So I found that really interesting. These are very witty in their own right, so they're quite happy in the company of Wilde. Perhaps not wholly incongruous, as Wilde is a very funny writer, but I have some other humorous books just lying there next to him, and they're from the same kind of period. First of them is Jerome K. Jerome's Three Men in a Boat. I do love this. It's very irreverent, puts me in mind of the Pickwick Papers. It's very gentle. Everything seems to happen on those blissful, never-ending English summer days. And then we have this, The Diary of a Nobody, which is far superior to Three Men in a Boat. I think it's one of the funniest books ever written. If you haven't looked at it, you may have only heard the title. Go and pick it up and give it a read. Come back and tell me that that wasn't an amazingly funny comic creation. And then lastly, we have this monstrous book here, the Oxford Book of Humorous Prose. Now this was put together by Frank Muir, who, for people from England who are around 50 years of age, you'll remember him as a frequent guest on TV panel shows, and he was always impeccably dressed and he spoke in a wonderfully arch way, but he was also something of a scholar, and he assembled this sizable anthology which traces the history of comic writing in English from the 15th century to the present day, and each of the selections is preceded by a short introduction which offers valuable context for what follows, and that makes this an essential purchase for anyone interested in comic writing in English. Now we've reached the top of the next bookcase, which is not in itself a great cause for celebration. However, in terms of our journey, we've reached a pivotal moment because we're about to enter the 20th century, and I'm going to become more excited because the majority of my favourite writers are concentrated during this period, and this top shelf covers writers who were active principally from the end of the Victorian period to the 1920s. Some do go on a little longer, and we'll start with John Buchan. Now, the 19th century saw the rise of the imperial romance and the detective story, but this period around the Great War saw the rise of the spy story, and Buchan is an acknowledged master of the genre. Everyone, I should imagine, is familiar with Richard Haney's first outing in the 39 Steps, but the follow-up, Greenmantle, is equally good, and it's distinguished by the amazing villain, and there's a kind of layer of S&M and homoeroticism in this novel that adds a whole new dimension. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And then this one, Prester John, it shows that Buchan can turn out the romance just like H. Rider Haggard did, because it overlaps considerably with King Solomon's Mines in terms of its geography and its local colour, and it's perhaps just as good, if not better. The suspense is excellent and the climax is extremely well handled, so I recommend both of these great reads. I'll deal with the next two writers together because they share a key concern, and that is how boys become men, and both of them will often use the sea as the agent of this transformation, and the first of them is Kipling, and here's an example, Captain's Courageous, where a brat falls over the side of his cruise ship and is picked up by some Atlantic fishermen and has to work a season with them, and that is what turns him from a boy into a man. A quite magnificent short novel. Then we have the Man Who Would Be King and Other Stories, Rewards and Fairies, the follow-up to Puck of Pook's Hill, which is here, and I chose this as one of my 5 great English novels, but not really. It's one of my very favourite children's books. It's absolutely magical and a great romp through English history. The Jungle Book I'm not so crazy about. It's the language and the moralising. It's a bit too much for me. Stalky Co is the best, I believe, of the public school stories, and I will do a video at some point on this and E.F. Benson and Tom Brown's School Days. There's a truly subversive quality to Kipling's take on this genre, and there's a great story in here called The Dead Cat, which is absolutely disgusting but so satisfying too. Then Kipling's verse, it may not be to everyone's taste, there's quite a lot of jingoistic stuff there, but there's some gold mixed in with it. Then I have his Kim, a masterpiece, and his autobiography. As you can see, I'm crazy about Kipling. This was a really good read. And last of all, my most recent Kipling purchase, a biography of him, The Unforgiving Minute. Haven't looked at it yet, but it does have, well, a quick look, and it has some great photos, but I haven't read any of it. So let's move on now to Conrad. I love the gravitas one finds in Conrad's writings. There's just something magnificent about his sentences, and this one, Lord Jim, is just absolutely crammed with great examples. Here's one when Jim is describing the washed up British sailors he's mixing with out in the east. He says here, they appeared to live in a crazy maze of plans, hopes, dangers, enterprises, ahead of civilization in the dark places of the sea, and their death was the only event of their fantastic existence that seemed to have a reasonable certitude of achievement. It's that reasonable certitude of achievement capping that sentence that just lends it that unmistakable quality there. So, Lord Jim, wonderful. Then I have some I haven't got round to yet. I have Victory, we'll get to that. Nostromo, to be read. Under Western Eyes, which I've already reviewed. I think it's review number 4. That was superb. Heart of Darkness, a classic. Don't be put off by having to read it as a student when you're at school. Read it again now. Now you're all grown up. And Lord Jim, a critical edition. So those are all of the Conrad offerings. The next author is Evelyn Waugh. I won't show you all the books of his that I've got because there are far too many. I think I've got all his novels, all his short stories, a bunch of critical books about him, biographies and his autobiography. So I'll just pick out a few of my favourite novels. This one, The Ordeal of Gilbert Pinfold, is magnificent. It's basically a autobiographical account of Waugh's nervous breakdown when he went on a cruise to try and recover, but instead he was subjected to all these terrible visions. It's one of the funniest books in the English language, and the paranoia is just so satisfying. So I would strongly recommend that. Next is Black Mischief. Famously has the cannibalism episode there. Politically incorrect, yes. Extremely funny and finely written, yes. I thoroughly enjoyed it. This one is great. It's from Waugh's time in Hollywood, which he didn't really enjoy. So he wrote this, and it's about the funeral home culture in America, and he had to sign an agreement that he wouldn't be buried at the cemetery that he satirizes so well. The Loved One, it's very short, but it's absolutely brilliantly done. And then this one, Vile Bodies, possibly for me his absolute masterpiece. This one, the writing is so crisp. It's easy to forget what was going on around Evelyn Waugh at the time and lose sight of just what a prodigy he was. This is so far ahead of what is coming out at the same moment. It's extraordinary. Then I have this Bright Young People, DJ Taylor. This is a great examination of the generation, the lost generation, which is depicted by Waugh in Vile Bodies. So I recommend that. Has some great pictures too. The next author is one that Waugh did not think much of because he was such a sloppy craftsman, but he's one of my absolute favourites, and that is D.H. Lawrence. Now, I categorise D.H. Lawrence alongside Oscar Wilde and William Blake as individuals where they are so fundamentally interesting that you wish to know every detail of their life, and the more you learn about them, the more many-sided they become. So I have many books about D.H. Lawrence alongside his fiction, and this, The Married Man, A Life of D.H. Lawrence, is really one of the best ones, I think. That was excellent. Then there's this one, which is a bit less successful, but good picture of Lawrence on the cover. Ottilie Morrell, A Life, because she had the close relationship with Lawrence. The Garsington set, she was a lover of Bertrand Russell and others, a great patroness of the arts. That was very good too. A Portrait of a Genius But, by one of my favourite writers, Richard Aldington, who's notorious for his very bitter novel, The Colonel's Daughter, and his hatchet job on Lawrence of Arabia. But this is really good too, has lots of inside detail. Then we can move on to the works themselves. We've got this very, very nice edition of Women in Love, which is very good. I enjoyed this one from 1922, I think it is, Aaron's Rod. It's about a musician. He plays the flute, I believe, and he deserts his Midlands family and roams across Europe and has a kind of love affair with some Italian countess. But it's got some great scenes there in Italy, and it kind of paves the way for one of my favourite Lawrence books, and that is Lawrence in Italy. And there's a great essay in here about the lemon trees. It's just a wonderful piece of travel writing. Oh, we've got Women in Love again. Then the short stories. Now, take a look, The Prussian Officer, because I can absolutely assure you, if you haven't read it, read it and you will see it's one of the finest short stories of the century. It's an impossibly powerful piece of writing, and it's kind of a proto-homosexual narrative here concerning an officer who abuses the young gentleman who's been his servant, his attendant, and it ends, as these things must, in murder. What a story. I was completely blown away by that. John Thomas and Lady Jane, early working of Lady Chatterley's lover. More short stories, more Sons and Lovers. The Plumed Serpent is a really unsuccessful one. The mystic Lawrence doesn't appeal to me very much. This is another great book about Lawrence, probably the best one that's been written in recent memory, and that is Jeff Dyer's Out of Sheer Rage. Now, I share quite a lot in common with Jeff Dyer, intellectual from a working class background. He went to Oxford, I didn't. He wrote this great book, I haven't written a great book, but I still, when I read him, I have that affinity, and he's also a huge fan like me of Thomas Bernard and Lawrence, and this was just great. Every page there was something there. It was so intelligent, and it really was genuinely insightful about Lawrence, and it also was extremely funny. Great book. We've got the rainbow. Lady Chatterley's lover again. That kind of is the end of the Lawrence stuff, and that will do for part 4. Thank you for watching. I will repeat my mantra: be safe, be strong, and I shall see you anon. But for now, nanu nanu.